Dojo webinar. So you are inaugural members, and appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday mornings for this. And I want to give a special shout out to Heather, who is, I think probably everyone knows, is in charge of our virtual dojo, who arranged this, and this is her idea. So if anything goes wrong, we know whose door to knock on. We wanted to start out by, yes.
Your computer monitor or something is coming into the camera view. Could you lower it a bit?
Oh, we can't have that.
Yeah.
What's that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We wanted to kick off this this webinar, What is Zen? And let me give a little history. And part of it is I'm very pleased to see we have an experienced group here. My concern is that a lot of this will be old hat for people. You're welcome to head to the exits now. But often it's helpful just to look at where we're at to take a new look and see what's our lineage, why are we in Zen training. So we'll leave it at that. But as you know, we've been having the online sittings now for what, 5 months, 4 or 5 months. And we have new people coming in who've never sat live with us, have never sat face-to-face with an instructor. And that was more where I was planning to do this. I've been teaching Zen, oh man, close to 35 years. And I know a number of you have heard this. So the way I would start a new student out would be, I like to have a one-on-one face-to-face meeting. And I like to do it individual to individual. And that accomplished 2 things. Number one, it allowed me to explain what our Zen training is about, because there are a lot of misconceptions about that for a lot of reasons. The other thing is to get a sense of, is this person in the right place? And will our training fit their wants and needs? With new people coming in now, we can't do that. We have a, what is it, an hour and a half? Oh, now here we have a new young student here. That's great. Okay. We can't do that. We have people who come in, they have what, an hour and a half online intro, which is really an intro to Zazen, not so much an intro to what our Zen training is about, what's our lineage of Zen. And I thought it would be helpful to have a webinar really for those people. Let's take a look at where we're at. And this would be a new way of giving people background. Well, I see very few new people here, so I'm going to launch into it. I'm allowing a lot of time for questions and answers at the end, but if particularly experienced people, feel free to chime in. If I feel that's breaking up the flow, I'll let you know. All right, so everyone knows how to sit, which is good. Now, I want you to take a minute or two, and I want you to reflect on what brought you to Zen training. What was going on in your life or in the world or whatever when you decided to make that call or make that walk and go in and see the Zen instructor? If it was, well, is anyone, Heather's the only one in the old days here who suffered through one of our one-to-one meetings. But what was going on? Why did you come in? And how did you think that Zen would help you with whatever that issue is? So just take a minute or so and reflect on that. Okay. Anyone want to comment or share what your reflections were?
Well, I pretty much came to Zazen, roshi, through karate training. It was just part of the curriculum. There was, it just seemed like a flow that went right, right into, martial arts.
Yeah. Yeah. So you came in, and that's was my route as well. So, okay, good. Anyone else want to comment? Is it Sarah? Yes.
Yeah, I was a body worker by trade and was working with a group that had already been through much training in Zen, and highly recommended it for me because I have a lot of anxiety issues and was going through a lot of emotional struggles, and so it was brought to my attention that how important it was to be able to train the mind, because I was always anti-drugs and stuff like that, so I was always looking for ways to be able to engage in my own process and being able to connect with myself and figure things out. So I did go away for a little while. Life happened, and then I had a teacher that had passed away recently that divinely reminded me that it was okay to come back. So I'm really grateful that you guys had the online dojo available so I could practice from afar.
Great. Thank Heather for that. Thanks, Sarah. Anyone else? Yes. Robert.
You're on mute, Robert.
Okay, sorry about that. Good morning. I also came through sitting Zazen through the practice of karate, and what I'd like to express is that during the day, it's always refreshing to catch the breath and to understand that catching the breath and focusing is an important, for me, is an important way to go through the day, focused as opposed to not being focused. And having sat in the mornings for this period of time virtually enhanced that to a point where I really didn't, to use that phrase, catch a breath as often as I do now. And I find it quite good, beneficial. And without going on, that's really what I wanted to express.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Yeah.
I feel like I sort of backed my way into it because I also was looking for body work and a way to know the body more, and accidentally, quote unquote, discovered Zen body therapy. And then the sitting and the Zen training part of that was just the bonus for me.
Yeah.
That I didn't know anything about, that I didn't expect, that, you know, even way earlier in my life, at some point I thought, oh, you know, it'd be cool to maybe study with a Zen master, or what would that be like? And it just sort of evolved and happened. And then the body work brought me into knowing Ginny and Zen leadership, and on and on and on to this moment right here.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. So we might, maybe we can come back to this later, but let me just kind of reflect on a couple things. I talked about this my last Tay show. When I would meet with people one-on-one, back in the day when I did the face-to-face intro, back in the day we could meet face-to-face, I would ask the question, why do you want to do this? And I learned a lot. The answers that you folks are giving me are really interesting because they are all tied to a particular activity in a way, shape, or form, either martial arts, which is my experience coming in, body work. I think those are the two themes. By and large, over the years, people the main reason people give at the beginning is stress management or some type of sort of general effectiveness. And well, maybe I can circle back to that another time, but very interesting. Your select group. Now I want you to reflect on whatever brought you in. Is that what's keeping you in? Has your reasons for doing this training shifted? Because believe me, mine did from when I started. So just think about that a minute. Won't go into answers. Maybe we'll come back and then move on. So take a minute. How has things shifted? You came in because of martial arts. Is that why you're doing this now? You came in because of body work. Is that why you're doing this now? Think about that. All right. Now, historically, well, everyone should know that Zen is a branch, essentially, is a school of Buddhism, has particular qualities. And that Buddhism, people began in the old days when it started for much different reasons, and similarly for Zen. Now, I'm gonna attempt to screen share here. Let's see here. Man, okay, where is the thing I wanted? Ah, there we go. Okay, can you all see that?
Yes.
Let me get the slideshow going here. I play from start. Okay, if you can't read this, oh man, it's small on my screen. But this was a brochure from the Hawaii dojo that just really impressed me when it came out, and every time I look at it, it impressed me again. I thought until recently that this was written by Tana Roshi, who we'll talk about in a bit, my teacher. It turns out that someone else wrote it, but he signed off on it, and I think it's a good articulation of how he saw things. So I'm going to have to get closer to the screen here to read it. And it goes, I'll read it out loud. A person comes to Zen when he seriously reflects over questions like, what is human being? What is the meaning of life? Who am I? Ordinarily, when one enjoys peace and good health, one does not feel any need for self-reflection and complacently identifies with his limited personality and body. But at some point, the contradictions and transients of human life will cause a person to despair. He may then seek his true self in capitals. The true self is absolutely free human nature, which transcends all dualistic categories, such as mind and body, rich and poor, life and death. And we talk a lot about non-dualism, resolving dualities. But let me just pick this apart a little bit of the way I see it. And that is, if you look at the foundational story, actually I like to call it the foundational myth of Buddhism. And you should all know the story of the historic Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, who, just to bullet point it, was born into royalty in a small kingdom in India, and his father tried to protect him. There was a fortune that was told when he was born that said he would grow up to either be a great king or a great religious figure. His father didn't like that other option, so he sheltered him. He kept him in this palace grounds and gave him everything he possibly wanted. And he never left the palace grounds. But at some point, after he was an adult and married and had a family and was on his way to become king, he started to wonder what was outside. So he convinced a servant or attendant to take him outside. And there were several journeys outside. First time he saw an old person, he said, "What's that?" And the guy said, "That's an old person. We all get old." "Oh, it's getting old. Oh, okay." And the second time was a sick person. "What's that?" "That's illness." Because obviously the pandemic hadn't hit the kingdom yet at that point. "What's that?" And that explains, we're all subject to illness. Third time, he sees a corpse, a dead body. And then he says, "What's this?" "Well, we all die. Everything's limited." Then he goes a fourth time, and he sees like a mendicant monk, an itinerant monk, a holy person. He says, "What's that?" "Well, he's a person who helps people figure this stuff all out." So it created sort of an existential crisis in the young Buddha. He just felt a tremendous drive to figure that out. And as you all know, he left the kingdom. He started his own path. He started different yogic trainings, almost died. And then he started what eventually became Buddhism, his own meditative practice, and had his big breakthrough, and then it became Buddhism. But he did not begin this training because he wanted to become more effective as a king or prince or husband or whatever. He did it because he felt a burning need to figure things out. And that is sort of at the essence of not only Buddhism, but Zen training. And the way I like to look at it is that's Zen training at its best. It helps people figure out these existential issues. And the key to that is resolving what we're calling dualisms or dualistic thought, such as mind and body, rich and poor, life and death. Well, then we'll go on to the second paragraph. A person might also come to Zen to develop strength and courage. The cultivation of the power of concentration means to cultivate the power which makes one the master of any situation. When a person is empty and plunges deeply into the surrounding world, all oppositions cease. The self and the world become one. Then one's actions are filled with extraordinary power. Daito Kokoshi, who was a very famous Zen master, a great Japanese Rinzai master, lived among beggars to refine himself by living under the worst possible conditions. Once a degraded samurai came to test a new sword on a beggar. Daito told the others to hide and sat in meditation. The samurai approached. Daito drew his sword and said, "Get ready. My sword is going to cut you in two." Daito did not move. An awe came over the samurai, who hesitated and beat a retreat. Another master was able to make a temple bell peal from 9 feet away with the power of his exhalation. So this is a second reason to train in Zen, and that is to develop power and effectiveness. And that's closer to the reasons that I started. And I'm going to guess that people who came in through martial arts, body work, they want to become more effective in something. And that could be anything. And that is another thing that Zen has to offer. But it is through the cultivation of power of concentration. The cultivation of the power of concentration means to cultivate the power which makes one the master of any situation. and we'll come back to that later. So we talk about ki. That is the power that comes from our meditative and other practices. Now, if you didn't start Zen for any of those lofty reasons that you wanted to figure out the true meaning of life, or you didn't want to make a bell peal from 9 feet away, don't worry, I sure didn't start that way. Here's my view on that, and this is why I asked the question of what keeps people in. We all have different reasons to come in. You can see, maybe you saw a demonstration. Actually, that was my experience. I saw a demonstration of the Hojo Kata, and I said, man, I have to have that. Whatever it is. Now, but by and large, I don't think that's what keeps people into training. And I think that people who continue with the training, and certainly people who go a long distance in it, do it because of much closer to these reasons that are given in this passage. But we may not be aware of it at the time, or it changes over time. So I started because I had met someone who had done the training in Hawaii and demonstrated me the Hojo Kata. And I said, the guy was doing karate at the time. And I felt the need to learn this. That's the best way I can explain it. But, and I began, but years later, and some of you heard this before, I realized that that's not what, not only was that not what kept me in, but that's not what grabbed me in the first place. So I'm a psychologist. I've never been very big on Freudian theory, although that was my training. And Freud had the idea of the conscious and unconscious, where the unconscious, the conscious mind is the tip of the iceberg, and the unconscious mind is the bottom of the iceberg. So this big, big thing. I think that a lot of us have reasons we are not aware of why we are doing this training. And that was true for me. I had issues. There was a death in my childhood that that really threw me for a loop. And it was, took a long, long time through my Zen training, but I realized well into it that, wow, that's why I was doing this. And it wasn't until I come to some resolution, that I looked back and said, oh, that's why I did this. Or it could change. You could start for whatever reasons and get deeper and deeper into it. So there are many paths in, but at its best, Zen will can help you figure out what's going on in your life. And maybe you can talk about it later, and it'll shift over time. Okay, so let's talk about our lineage of Zen. And I think most of you who have been training for a while know this. Our lineage of Zen was founded by these two people. So on my left, the guy who's seated, Omori Sogen. So he was born at the beginning of the last century. He died in 1994. Probably a number of you have read his book and read his biography, but he was a noted Kendo teacher who, after World War II, became a monk and then became a Zen master. So he was a master really of three things. He was a Zen master, he was a sword master, and he was a calligraphy master, which explains a lot about historically our training. The other gentleman here, Tanoi Tenshin, was my Zen teacher. And he was born roughly mid-century, right before World War II. He was a Japanese American from Hawaii. And he studied under Omori Roshi. And just briefly, for the story is Tanaroshi felt, again, this existential need to, well, he studied martial arts from, I think, age 4 or 5. With living in Hawaii, he had access to top level, 8th rank instructors. And he studied martial arts to try and figure out the meaning of life. He was very explicit about that. He had scrolls of mastery. For those who are not familiar with Japanese martial arts, when you become the master, when you're given transmission, you become the successor to the teacher. You're given scrolls, and he had them, and I think in about 5 or 7 different things, very unusual. He was a musician. He was a high school band teacher, taught at Farrington High School in Hawaii, and as a school teacher, he'd get his summers off. So every summer, he would go to Japan and study a different usual martial art. That's where he got these certificates. And his wife was also Japanese, so he'd go there over winter break. He was there a lot. And he was about to go to study a very esoteric Buddhist practice called Shugendo. They're called Yamabushi. These are mountain warriors. They live in caves. This is the old tradition. They'd live in caves and had very aesthetic lives. And he was going to do that for a summer. And he was about to go, and a friend said, no, you don't want to do that. You should go study with Omori Sogen. He's the last of the samurai. And he has this special sword form called the Hojo Kata, and you should learn that. So Tanaroshi went there, was introduced to Omori Sogen, and Omori Sogen demonstrated this Hojo Kata to him. And Tanaroshi asked to be his student. And Tanaroshi asked why. What do you want to do that? He said, I want to bring Shugyo to the West. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself, but well, let me skip ahead. Okay, there are 2 terms here that I'm trying to keep the Japanese terminology down. One is Shugyo, and this is what he said. I want to bring the concept of Shugyo to the West. Now, Shugyo is a word that simply has no good English translation. It's often translated or described as the highest form of intensive training. It's when you throw your whole self into learning something. That's one way of looking at it. Sometimes it's called spiritual forging, kind of like you're pounding something on a forge, and through this constant repetition, that's the other part, you get it all smoothed out, like if it's a sword blade or something like that. Okay, and the other element of it is this constant repetition. Sometimes it's described as repetitive daily practice. A good way to do it is to have something that's fairly simple that you could do every day, come hell or high water, not worry about how you're going to do it. And this is Shugyo. So Tanaroshi says, I want to bring Shugyo to the West. And then he went on, became a Zen master under Omori Sogen, and the 2 of them together founded this temple in Hawaii, and a number of you have been there. Chozenji. It's in the Honolulu city limits. It's it's built in traditional Japanese style. Among other things, they're stunning sunsets. But Chozenji, the name, I'm not going to go into, there are complexities of the name Chozenji. We generally, a kind of base level, describe it as Zen is Zen, whatever that is, we're talking about that. And Cho means to transcend or go beyond. Tanaroshi used to describe it as super Zen, and I thought that he was kind of making that up until I looked at an actual translation of the character of Cho, and it's super. So it's the idea of and Ji means it's a temple. So the Zen temple of Zen transcending Zen. There are deeper meanings of this that we've been exploring lately, but I'm not going to go into it for these purposes. But the idea is, as Zen, it was developed specifically to bring Zen to the West and to bring this tradition of Zen to the West. And in so doing, it will change its form. So a lot of things that we do, including some of our practices, we don't even know the extent of it yet at this point because we're a generation into it, will change. That's Chozen-ji. And again, Tanai Roshi was my teacher. He died in 2003. This is the canon, the founding document of Chozen-ji. This was written by Omori Sogen, what's the date, 1979. I first went to Chozen-ji in 1981, so just a couple years before that. And he just sat down, I was told he just, took out a pen and wrote this out. And we put this in many of our writings. It says, Zen is to transcend life and death, all dualism. So again, I want to thread that back to the point I make that at its best, Zen helps people resolve existential issues through the resolution of dualistic thinking. To truly realize that the entire universe is the true human body through the discipline of mind and body in oneness. Miyamoto Niten, usually known as Miyamoto Musashi, called it Iwa no Mi, body of a huge boulder, going through life, rolling and turning like a huge boulder. Yagyu Shekishusai named it Marobachi no Bichi, a bridge round like a ball, being in accord with the myriad changes of life. Beside this actual realization, there is nothing else. That's a pretty, that's a pretty intense statement right there. Zen without the accompanying physical expression is nothing but empty discussion. Martial ways without truly realizing the mind is nothing but beastly behavior. We agree to undertake all of this as the essence of our training. All our students strive diligently. Gentlemen of the Rinzai Honzan, the main temple, open your eyes and together let us send it out to the world. So it was set up to send out this type of training to the world. And without going into a lot of technicalities of this, it emphasizes, and this is, I think in many ways, if not a unique, it is a unique emphasis, I think, of our lineage of Zen. There are a couple things. Number one is the intense physicality of it. That we talk about mind and body in oneness, and we have discretely physical practices that, frankly, I've seen in no other Zen organizations, or at least few of them. The second is the integration or the incorporation of not just martial arts, but ways of living, what traditionally would be called those, the ways with Zen training. Is very, very unusual in this day and age, and that bears our stamp. I also want to a bullet here, that second, Yagyu Shekishusai named it Manabashi no Bichi, a bridge round like a ball, being in accord with the myriad changes of life. And that ties into that statement I read from that brochure about this freedom of being able to manage circumstances, being able to adapt is very critical to our form of Zen. Okay, so we have Hawaii, and then I have in the mid-1980s, I set up a branch of Chozen-ji in Wisconsin. Oh, that brings up another aspect of our training. And I called our organization, which luckily we no longer call ourselves, the International Zen Dojo Wisconsin / Chozen-ji Beitsuin of Wisconsin. And I did that because I modeled the name of the actual organization in Hawaii. But there are two things. There's the International Zen Dojo and the Chozen-ji Beitsuin. Our training is also unusual in that, well, this part isn't so unusual. You can train as fully as a lay person. You do not have to take any vows. You don't have to become a priest. You can do whatever and be whatever you want to be. But we also have a religious side where we have people who are priests. We've ordained, I think, 4 or 5 in Wisconsin. But also our temples, our organizations, are simultaneously both dojos for lay training and temples for religious training. People don't have to choose, they can do both. But that's unusual in this day and age. So at any rate, I was teaching since, I think, 1983 or something like that in Wisconsin. And about 12, 13 years ago, the Greens moved to Wisconsin. In some ways, that's history. Everyone should know. They bought this property in Spring Green where we have the Spring Green Dojo. It is a bucolic setting. It can get very cold in the summer, in the winter rather, and hot in the summer. And here's a picture of it. I think most people have, well, a lot of people here have not been out there. And then last year in the end of May 2019, culmination of a long dream of mine, we bought a piece of property in Madison. For those of you who haven't been to Madison, Madison is the capital of Wisconsin. It's the second largest city in the state. We bought this old church that had been a homeless shelter. The church was built in 1920. And a couple pictures here. These are fairly old pictures. We're undergoing this massive renovation project. The picture on my left here, the full building is what it looked like shortly after we bought it. And here you can see the other picture is we have called this temple Daikozenji. Excuse me. It means the temple between the lakes. Madison is on an isthmus, an isthmus between 2 lakes. And we thought it was a very fitting name. So we have this sign up there and we have a lot of activity there. I want to return to here. There are 2, I talked about Shugyo. And the way I would couch this is Shugyo is the foundation of our training. Everything else we do revolves around that. But the other is Samadhi. In the passage I mentioned, I read earlier, the first one, talks about the power of concentration. It's talking about Samadhi. Now, for recently, which in my book is about the last 20 years, people have been talking a lot about mindfulness. We do not use that term and we do not think in terms of mindfulness. We talk about Samadhi. And they are related, they're overlapping terms, but they're different in many ways. Or I should say in some key ways. Samadhi is another word. It has no good translation into English. Sometimes it's called, it's just called concentration. Sometimes it's called, we like to call it relaxed concentration, and more recently, relaxed concentration within no mind, or in no mind, or no self. And there's some nuances to that, and actually I really like that description. But another term that's used is absorption, and that is when you are concentrating so fully in something that you lose yourself. And at the higher form, and Samadhi is a continuum from fairly, and everyone's experienced some level of it, like a basic flow state, kid playing a video game, watching listening to good music, playing music. Dancers understand this, athletes understand this, to a very deep, what we call absolute Samadhi, where you really lose the distinction between yourself and the outer world. That's what we're talking about, the entire universe is the true human body. So Samadhi also weaves itself through all of our training. both in Zazen and other things that we'll come to. Now, historically, as I said earlier, that one of our unique stamps in our training is the explicit integration of martial, maybe I didn't talk about martial and fine arts. And Tana Roshi used to use this term Zen Kensho. And I want to talk briefly about that, but a lot of us are viewing this somewhat differently now. And talking more about Shugyo being what weaves everything together. But I'm going to talk about this. You could look about it, for most of our training, there are 3 elements in terms of how people will approach it. Zen is, refers to Zazen. Everyone here knows Zazen. Zen means Zen, whatever that is, and Za means seated or sitting. So Zazen is sitting Zen, and we usually call it Zen meditation. Well, some people don't like the term meditation for that, because meditation connotes having something in your mind, where we really try to empty our mind with that when we do Zazen. But Zazen also involves other, or excuse me, the Zen of Zen Kensho also involves other traditional temple practices, including chanting. Well, we call it okyo. They're chanting sutras, other what's called dharanis, which have no literal meaning. They're kind of sound incantations. And chanting is an extremely part of our training, because it's a very good way to experience resonance. Now, a lot of people have heard this story before, but Tana Roshi, so my teacher, as I said, was a musician. He played the clarinet, and he was a high school band teacher. And the original students, my senior students, when I went to Hawaii, they had all been in his band. And they said it was the only band, marching band anyone knew, a high school band, where the tough guys were the band members. And the #1 student was the band captain. But Tana Roshi used to use a lot of musical analogies in his teaching. And he said that in Zen, we learn to play our body, resonate our body, like someone learns to play an instrument. And you tell a story that if you give when kids start music instruction, 3rd or 4th grade, and you give them a violin or whatever instrument, they'll make a horrible screechy tone. And then as with practice, it'll get mellower and mellower. And then for those who stick around, it gets really mellow, even if they use the same instrument. So something's changed in their body that allows the violin to vibrate and the body to vibrate in resonance with it. And he says that's exactly what happens in Zazen. We learn in Zen training, we learn to train our body as an instrument. And he said we would learn to vibrate in accord with the universe. And chanting is a very, very good way to do that. This is called the Mokugyo. For those of you who don't know, it looks like a wooden fish, a carp for good luck in Confucian cultures. And Mokugyo, I'm told, translates as wooden fish. The other element that's very important in our training is work, samu in Japanese. So for example, I spent my intensive living experience in Hawaii, I spent most of my time cutting down and moving trees. Historically, monks did maintenance of the dojo, but we would do a lot of heavy work because it's a good way of training the body, all the mind, body, relationship. So this is a little, and we work very fast, as I'm going to show you with this. This was as we were doing the initial demolition of the new dojo in Madison. So. And it's me coming in at the last minute to supervise. So work is very important. We have a lot of work projects going on at Mifflin Street. People are willing to join us. We do social distancing. Okay, so Zen, I've talked about. Ken is the second part. Ken means sword in Japanese, and it refers generically to the martial arts. Probably maybe half this group, including myself, came into Zen training through martial arts. And for those of you who know me, I specialized in Kudo, Japanese archery. That's me with my #1 student in Hawaii in 2020. And the other picture is Omori Sogen, who is facing the camera, performing the Hojo Kata. This is what got Tana Roshi involved in the training, and ultimately, although I never really learned it very well, because I focus on Kudo, this is what got me into it. So the martial arts, we have Zen, Zazen temple practices, martial arts. And then we have fine arts. The major fine arts that we're teaching now, I see we have Esteban on screen, and I would recommend Esteban's online Shodo class. Oh, well, anyway, I get ahead of myself. Shodo, calligraphy, the way of writing, and we have ceramics at Spring Green. We have a traditional Japanese wood-fired kiln in Spring Green. Scott Keel is teaching ceramics in Madison, and we're going to be firing. There's going to be spring firing in about 3 weeks in Spring Green. First one since we rebuilt the kiln after an accident. Here's the kiln. I'm showing you this. I like this picture. Working on a kiln firing is a really, really interesting experience. I had a very meaningful experience doing my first one out there. It lasts about 24 to 48 hours. You have to ramp up the temperature at a particular incline so that it doesn't burst the vessels that are in there. And then you have to keep the heat. You have to split the wood before that. I'd recommend it. So we have Zen Kensho. What underlies these things? Okay. Number one, they're all forms of shugyo. These are things that can and should be approached as intense spiritual practice. These are disciplines that you can do every day. You don't have to do them all or have a regular practice. Oh, I started to say about Esteban has a wonderful online Shodo introductory course. I took it a couple of months ago, and I would recommend it for everyone. So maybe at the end, Esteban can talk about that. But what underlies them? Okay, there is a mind-body relationship that we approach this with what's called mind and body in oneness. And the integrating factor of that, the way that that's integrated, or the point of integration of the mind and body, is what we call the hara. And I think that people are familiar with that. That is the lower abdomen and the mind-body integration that comes from regulating breathing and posture through the hara. And that brings up the second thing that interweaves all these elements of our training, and that is samadhi. And samadhi, I am fully convinced, is created by the hara breathing and regulation of posture. So we approach everything through that. Now, if you study these traditional arts like Kudo, archery, or ceramics, or Shodo, those are broken down and very carefully interwoven in the teaching. So that's an advantage of studying this in the traditional way. But in many ways, we are breaking away from the traditional formulation of Zen Kensho, in that the Japanese, the martial arts and fine arts as defined are really not culturally specific for us. In other words, there are other ways within our culture that might be helpful for people to really throw themselves into and go into in the same ways that you would with other ways. My personal bias is that's done best if you're doing these other things as well. I'd like my students to be doing a martial art and a fine art. But if you throw yourself fully into the study of something and you integrate it, you do it as mind, body, and oneness, then you have Shugyo in kind of your everyday living. And Heather aside, does anyone recognize this guy? And if John Fry doesn't get this, I'll be very disappointed. Dr. Fry? No, maybe, I don't know, maybe he's no longer here. All right. Has anyone seen the movie Jiro Dreams of Sushi? I know Heather has. If not, watch it tonight. It's Academy Award-winning documentary. This guy, Jiro, I forgot his last name, was the #1 rated sushi chef in Japan. And he approached sushi making truly as Shugyo. His whole life was around it. And hence the name. He would dream of sushi. What's the best way of making sushi? And I liked his picture. If you look at this picture of Jiro, you put a sword in his hand and he's a kendo master. You put a bow in his hand and he does that. You put a brush in his hand, you can see him being a Shodo master. He's got it. And he talks very eloquently on how, in his case, your profession, you should just you learn everything you can about it. But from my view, from the standpoint of Shugyo, it's not just learning about it, it's having this mind-body integration on it when you do it. And the best way to learn that is through Zazen, and I would recommend martial and fine art as well. Let me just say a couple other things here. Seshing. We have something called Seshing. Shin means heart or mind, and sei means to gather. So it's a gathering of the heart and mind, or gathering of the spirit. And these are intensive practices. They are usually 3-night or 6-night. We do 4 a year in Madison, and that's a time to really boost your training. This was, you train all day, you train into the night. This was a light night photo. You can actually, we blew this up, you can actually see the people training in there. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, we are not able to do in-person seshing because of the pandemic. And we had done 2, forgetting the naming, online seshing. A number of you participated in them. We have one coming up. As part of a virtual dojo, Heather coined a name for this online variant of seshing. And Heather, could you just comment on the name choice and what it means?
Yes, the name is Keishin, and the name means it's a play on Sesshin, which, as Kushner Roshi said, was to collect the mind. Keishin means to connect the mind. So that's what we're doing when we're training online in our own respective dojos.
And thank you, Heather. Let me just say personally, we we were scheduled to have a session right after the shut-in order started, and we thought, what are we going to do? And we did something online, and I think a number of us went into it skeptically, but it was a big success. That was 4-night, and then we did a 6-night one, so 7 days, 6-night, and it was, I thought, a smash success. We have one coming up. Put a plug in September 26th. Heather, September 20.
I'm not sure. It is the end of September.
End of September.
Yeah.
So, recommend that. So that's Sesshin and Keishin. Oh yeah, I have this slide here. And Zazenkai is Zazenkai is also an intensive form of training. There's no set form. It could be a day, it could be overnight, and it's student-led. And we have one just coincidentally next weekend. Heather, would you like to say a couple words about that?
Yeah, that's on next Saturday, the 29th, and it will start in the morning with daily Zazen in the morning, and we'll go all day through daily Zazen in the evening. And there is a lot of Zazen, but it's going to be interspersed with Tai Chi and other things. So it'll be broken up, but it's definitely a good chance to boost your training and try to take things to the next level.
Yeah, thank you. I'd really recommend it. This Zazenkai. And one other thing that we do, and that's called Sanzeng. Now, the Rinzai form of Zen, this Rinzai school of Zen, which is our school, does what's called Koan Training. And Koan Training, I'm not going to go into this in any depth now. If there are questions, I can do it. But I look at it, a koan is a question that cannot be answered with the logical mind that helps people resolve dualities. And I talked earlier that resolving dualities is at the core of our training. And historically, one is not considered a Zen student until one has a koan. And this is someone waiting to go in the sun's. I love this photo. It reminds me of Andrew Wyeth. Or not Andrew Wyeth. Yeah, Andrew Wyeth. Oh, whatever. Waiting to go give her answer to Sesshin, to Sanzeng. Okay, that concludes the. I've gone over, I think, everything I wanted to say, and I wanted to allow ample time for questions and answers. We have an experienced group. If you can ask me to point out all the things I was unclear about, if you have any comments, or now's the time, any questions about our Zen training, broadly defined. We can play stump the chump.
If you folks want to like raise your hand in the, I can see you, or you want to put your question in the chat, I'll try to moderate a bit in terms of calling on people. Jim?
Roshi, if I may, I'd like to go back to your question about why we remain in this training. Okay. So for me, I made a promise to a monk in 1969, and he asked me if I would continue to train in karate and Zen. I said yes. Okay, all well and good. 10 years later, I trained in Okinawa, and I saw what karate training without is, and I wanted to have no part of that. So I renewed the promise to myself, and I said, I will never train in karate or any martial art without Zen. So that's the reason why I stayed in.
Yeah.
It was just, it was hey ho, beastly fighting.
Yeah.
without the Zen to balance
Yeah.
martial art training. It was ugly to watch.
Yeah. Wow. I'm really glad. I'm glad you brought us back to that. And I'm glad you brought it up. That was very much my experience as well. In that after I was exposed to Zen training, I dropped out of karate at that point. I had no exposure to a Zen-informed karate then, because for much the same reasons. And I would add that they made it sound like they were doing Zen training, and they weren't. So yeah, thank you. Okay, or if anyone else, let's say, I did ask people to reflect on what kept you in, do that. We'll just throw it open. Yes, Pat.
My question is to you because you mentioned that when you practice Zen and you feel the shift, and when you feel that, is that a permanent change in you?
Well, the shift that I remember talking about is that I realized that the reasons that kept me in is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Because it's different. Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's a really a good question, and there are multi-layers to it.
Mm-hmm.
But let me say this, that it wasn't that the shift was very gradual, but my awareness of it was sudden.
Mm.
So I was very much on the road, and at that point, I realized that, well, this is why I've been doing this all along, and this is what kept me in, and this is why I'm going to continue. So in that sense, yes, it was very much permanent for me. Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a great question. No, yeah, I never thought of that. Okay, anyone else? No. Anyone?
Kushner Roshi, I was wondering if you could speak a bit about your Kudo training and how you train in Kudo and why you continue to train in Kudo the way you do.
Okay, yeah. So, all right. Well, let me tie it together with what Jimmy said, and actually it ties into what Pat had asked. So, I studied Okinawan karate for about 4 or 5 years. And actually, I was about 2 months from getting my black belt, which meant a great deal to me in those days. And then I had this experience where I saw the Hojo kata and was introduced to Zen training, and I stopped it. I just felt it was kind of almost like hypocritical to go back. I will say this, I've written about this publicly, and I have walked back on a lot of what I've written because if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't have gotten involved in Zen training. So I think that there was a method to this. Anyway. And when I began Chosen Zen training, pretty much everyone there was encouraged to do a martial art. And most people are doing Aikido. I never had a feel for Aikido. I didn't like rolling. No offense, Esteban. I didn't like rolling. I never had a feel for it, and I didn't know what I wanted to study. I felt I really wanted to study something. I felt I couldn't go back to karate. Well, what am I going to do? So I asked Tana Roshi, my teacher, what martial arts should I study? And I thought for sure he'd say Aikido, and I'd have to like, okay, all right. So And he said, well, why don't you, he said, you should learn Kudo. And I knew the word. I had read the book Zen and the Art of Archery. And just something clicked to me. I said, yeah, okay. Even though I read the book, I had no sense. And I then arranged my life. I took the next year, I quit my job and I quit my job and I arranged the whole time to do this, kind of sight unseen. I arranged the first time I went to Hawaii to coincide with, they had this visiting teacher there. So I went in cold. I got off the plane and within an hour, I had a bow in my hand, making a fool out of myself. So I did it in some ways unthinkingly, but it did tap into something, I think, on a non-conscious level. And in some ways, it fit me very well. Now, Kudo is unusual as a martial art, and in many ways, it might be the most foreign to Americans. It's very culturally specific. And if anyone has not read the book Zen and the Art of Archery, I would strongly recommend it. It has merit over and above anything to do with archery. It's one of the best. It's been described as the most influential book on Zen to appear in the West. And I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a very good account. You know, Heather, for me, my Zen training has been so interwoven with Kudo that in some ways I can't separate them. There are a lot of Zen principles, and this will be true of anything, and it needn't be a martial or fine art. This is where you get into Jiro dreams of sushi, that are things that are essentially koans, dualities that you need to work out on a non-conscious level. In archery, it's like some of the key, there are two key ones. One is shooting without shooting, a natural release, so that you set up the physicality of your mind, or the integration of your mind and body, so the release is a natural action. So you are allowing the bow to release in a way that you do not interject conscious activity. And when that happens, there's a tremendous resonance between you and the bow. You can actually hear it hum. The other is aiming, of aiming without aiming. We can talk about that. Okay, so I mean, these are Zen principles bound up in Kudo. But another is, it is a very good way to develop hara. Hara being, I think everyone knows, the abdominal breathing and abdominal power and ki that comes from that. Now also, from the standpoint of Shugyo, it is, Heather, you'll back me up on this, it's a very repetitive action. You're basically doing the same thing. So in some ways, it's made for Shugyo, a simple activity you can do every day. And you just refine that and refine that and refine that. And there have been times in my life where I've become completely obsessed with these fine points of Kudo. I don't know, maybe that's just me. But that's it. It's been very much fundamental to my Zen training. Heather, how would you answer that for yourself? Other than the fact I think I made you do it. Actually, I didn't. You did that on your own.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have similar perspectives, I guess. I think the other thing that's interesting about it is how much the quality of my Kudo kind of varies with my state of mind. Like, I'm a pretty flinchy person, so if I'm not like in a Samadhi state, I tend to flinch on release. So it gives me that feedback in terms of training myself, training my body, training my mind. And I think there's the aspect of pushing beyond what you would normally think is your physical boundary. So, you know, can you get to the point where it's not just, you know, your muscles or your bones that are pulling the bow, you know, if you do it for hours and hours straight, but also, you know, ki and basically everything's online and working together, your breath. So yeah, I think it's a great training tool, if not very frustrating at times.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing about Kudo, I'm sorry. Thanks, Heather. Is that the target doesn't move, which means any changes in yourself. So there's a saying in Kudo that after the archer misses the target, he looks inward. And that really fits. But anyway, thanks for the comments. Yeah. Yeah, Paul.
Staying with Kudo, you did bring that to one of the Zen leadership weekends.
Yeah, well, a long time
a
ago.
couple years ago.
Yeah.
And what I was particularly struck with was what I think of as sort of a ritual, a movement ritual to prepare.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more to that beginning piece.
What I did was a formal demonstration that is ritualized, and it involves preliminary motions and whatnot. And that is to develop the Samadhi, to develop or deepen the Samadhi, both in the person, in that case me, and in the audience. Samadhi is contagious. That's a bad word this day and age. Help me. We pick up Samadhi from others sympathetically. So as I said earlier, Tana Roshi would say we learn to vibrate differently. And through that vibration, we change the vibration in others. So to do a formal ceremony like that, and it takes, 6-8 minutes, is kind of an intense way, both for the person performing it, but also ideally bringing it out in the audience. We don't shoot like that all the time. That's kind of ceremonial. I'd forgotten I did that. Does that answer your question,
Yeah.
Paul? Yeah, okay.
It does, and I'm going to suggest that you do it again at an IZL weekend when I'm there,
okay.
particularly.
Okay, I think we'll have
Really
Heather.
loved it.
Okay, thanks. Oh, maybe we'll bring Heather in.
Great.
Okay, any other questions? Or any, yeah, Pat.
My question is, I have been practice with you, daily practice in the evening for a month, but I still have a difficult time when I have to facing the reality, because I also have anxiety or stress sometimes. But when those things happen, I don't know how to cope the hara breathing with the situation.
Yeah.
I don't know how, maybe because I didn't practice enough. I don't know, what is your recommendation?
Okay, so, and you've been training a month, you said, and you didn't do Hada training before that. So it's for most people, it's not easily acquired. It's not like I can show you how to do a push-up, okay, and then you can do a push-up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it takes that kind of self-development. Okay, so what's the best way to do it? So sit regularly, okay? Which you're doing. I mean, I see you online. You're online more than I am. Have you looked at the Hada development website?
Yes.
Okay, are you doing any of the exercises then?
Yes, some of them, and also Ron teaching me another kind of breathing for hara.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you say Ron is?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So one thing that I would recommend is I have on that, I call it the Isometric Exercise, to take some time, even a couple minutes during the day, get some private time and try doing it. So you don't need to be limited by the Zazen time, but you know, you could go into a bathroom or whatever and do those exercises, you know, maybe several times a day. But it is a question of repetition. I'd be happy to, if you want to arrange a Zoom conference sometime, I'd be happy to go over them with you.
Okay.
Just back channel me email.
Okay.
Okay. It'll come with time.
Okay.
So okay. What do you do during the day? What is your job?
I work at university, but I do practice yoga as Everett recommend me to practice yoga. So I have been doing yoga, and I feel it's work together.
Yeah, you do yin yoga?
They call like.
What he was doing more recently. Yeah.
So
I don't know.
That, and I feel like it's work together because it's all about mind and body.
Yeah, and you had a good teacher with that. So okay, but back channel me. Okay. Any other questions? We're just about on time. Any of the old time? We have old timers here. When Jimmy said he did something in 1969, where were the rest of you in 1969?
We have a question in the chat from Gordon.
Yeah, Gordon.
How does one practice Shodo calligraphy and fine arts in general as Shugo?
Okay, Esteban.
Hello. It's the same way that Kushner Roshi has been describing this whole time, is that repetitive activity. You know, when you begin training in calligraphy formally, all you do is dots and lines for hours and hours and hours and hours. And it's through those small repetitive activity that you can reach that absorption meditative activity or state. And I think that with our training, if you've seen the calligraphy that we do during sesshin, it's considered like a higher level of that demonstration, or you're trying to demonstrate that somehow you are reaching that state where you can pick up the brush and then just in one moment, in one instance, be able to draw the characters that we're studying at that point. And you are demonstrating that state of samadhi, like Kushner Roshi is explaining. But before you go to sesshin, if you're taking onto this practice, it's no different than practicing martial arts, practicing music or cooking or archery or any of those practices where your practice is going to be based on daily repetitive activities. And that's the framework of learning fine arts. And you can talk about fine arts whether you're doing painting, drawing, photography, ceramics. It's all about that daily repetitive practice. So with calligraphy in per se, it's there are different drills, there's different characters, basic strokes that creates the framework, understanding the tools, right? Just like archery, you need to understand how to hold the bow, how to stand. Same thing with calligraphy, how to hold the brush, how to sit, how to hold the paper. You know, you understand the tools, and then you can engage in that practice, and eventually the activity and the practice itself just sort of kind of absorbs itself into one thing, which is what we're in a way aiming, with our method. Does that make sense?
Gordon, you want to put in chat if you have any follow-up questions? Yeah, let me just pick up on a couple things. And number one, again, I would strongly recommend Esteban's online introductory course. I've done Shodo. I was never really taught, it's like never taught basics. And then I did it was a totally humbling experience. And it's very, very well done. I think we have a link to it. Do we have a link to it on the website, Heather?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, okay, so you can check that out, or maybe it's Esteban, if you want to put your
Yeah, yeah, I think the link is on the virtual dojo, and also I
okay.
would like to say that for Shosei Zen students, if you want to register for the class and you put the code Shosei Zen, you get a 30% off. Then this is only for
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
This is only for our students here at the Shosei Zen.
That reminds me of something I neglected to mention earlier, and that is we changed the name of our organization from this thing with the awful slash to Chosei Zen. And that was, we formally changed this year. And there's, I don't have time to go into what that means. Maybe we'll do that in another seminar. I meant to say it earlier. So this actually gives us our sort of a different stamp in terms of what we're doing. Thank you. But let me also say that I think one part of learning any kind of art is to not stop at the boundaries of the art. So if you're doing Shodo or even Zazen, and to pick up on what Pat said, you wanna approach what you're doing in your daily life as if you are holding the brush or the bow or whatever it is, and get your mind, body in oneness, and throw yourself into it. And then again, if not everyone in our training is going to do a martial art or fine art necessarily, but then pick something. What is it that you really want to concentrate on as your shugyo? Okay, any other questions? Maybe this is, I think we're out of time, are we not? People, feel free, thank you. Feel free to write me directly if you have any follow-up questions. Our next webinar is, you know, offhand?
I think it's September 8th.
September 8th. And that's
Green Roshi will present on what is Zen art.
Ah, yes. Oh, okay, apropos.
Yeah.
And I would recommend for everyone who can to do the Zazen Kai and the Keishin. We have those coming up. Best ways to improve your training. Okay, and I want to thank Heather for all her help. And everyone have a great day.
Thank you, Roshi. Thank you, Heather.
Okay, bye-bye.
Everyone. Thank you, Roshi.